Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is another episode of the Letterboxd Roundup, this time for the month of June. If you're new to this channel and new to this series, this is a series where I take all the movies that I reviewed on Letterboxd and talk about them a little bit and explain why I gave whatever rating I gave them. If you're into this, please like, subscribe, and comment and let me know what you think about some of these movies. Also, add me on Letterboxd if you'd like. My username is Blake7180. I'll put my link in the description. I'm always looking for new people to add on there, so add me and I'll add you back. The first movie I watched for the month of June was on June 1st, and that was The Horror of Dracula. The Horror of Dracula was one of the first movies released in the Hammer Horror series over in the UK. Basically what this is this is the British version of Dracula, and Hammer Horror overall is the British version of the Universal classic monsters. I've heard for a long time that these Hammer Horror versions of classic monster movies are really good and even better than the ones that were released in America. So of course I'm a big Dracula fan, so the first one I wanted to watch was The Horror of Dracula. Overall, I will say I did like this one more than the Universal version of Dracula. This movie is basically just your typical Dracula movie, you know, the story that's been done so many times before. However, in this one, the big thing for me was that Dracula is played by Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee was so good as Dracula in this movie. I know there's many more of these Dracula movies with Christopher Lee as Dracula, so I do look forward to eventually watching those. The one complaint I had with this movie is I wish there was more Dracula. Christopher Lee was just so good as Dracula. He was really the perfect choice, and we only got like maybe 5 minutes of him, so there wasn't really much of him as Dracula, but every minute that he was in this movie, he was so good. Overall, I give The Horror of Dracula a 3.5 out of 5. The next movie I watched was on June 3rd, and that was It Follows. It Follows is one of the best horror films of the 2010s. I really don't know why it took me this long to finally watch it, but I finally decided to watch it, and I was really happy with it. This movie is basically about a curse that is sort of passed on through being intimate with people. This movie is basically a commentary on STDs and the dangers it can be for young people. Basically, once you get this curse, there's this entity that's following you, which is why it's called It Follows, and you have to pass on the curse to another person by being intimate with them, and you have to do that before the entity catches up to you. And then once you pass it on to the next person, then the entity will go after that person, and so on and so on. It sort of reminded me of like The Ring, with how you watch this VHS tape and you have 7 days, or you can show it to somebody else and then it passes on to them. It's a very well directed movie. The cinematography in this is so good, and that's one of the reasons why this stands out so much for the 2010s, and especially because this movie has such deep themes to it. In the early 2010s and the 2000s, certainly, most horror films didn't really have any messages to it or any deep themes behind the film. Most of them were just straight up, you know, gore and trying to shock the audience. So when a movie like this came out and it actually had something to say and had important elements to it, it really shocked everybody. You could also say this was the beginning of the rebirth of the horror genre. Shortly after this, 2 years later, Jordan Peele released his Get Out film, and that movie skyrocketed horror to what it is right now in the 2020s. Overall, I give It Follows a 4 out of 5. Next, on June 6th, I watched the newest film in the John Wick universe, Ballerina. I love the John Wick films, so I knew going into Ballerina that I was most likely going to really like this movie, and I did really like it. It's just as action-packed as the John Wick movies. Ana de Armas is so great as her character in this film. Now, the only complaint I had with this movie, if I had to pick a complaint with it, is the plot is sort of generic. It follows her trying to get revenge on a guy that murdered her father. I feel like that sort of story has been done so many times before. But besides that, the movie was really good. It was very action-packed. There's 2 scenes in particular that really stood out. There's a scene where the entire fight sequence is all just her using grenades. Nothing else. No guns, nothing, just grenades. That scene is crazy. When you see the movie, you'll see for yourself that scene is crazy. And the second scene is where she has a flamethrower and the guy she's fighting also has a flamethrower. It's a really incredibly visually stunning scene in the film. You don't see two people with flamethrowers going against each other very often. So if you get a chance to see this movie, I highly recommend just to see that. She also does encounter John Wick in this movie, so if you're a fan of John Wick, he is in this. He is only in it for around maybe 20 minutes, but the time that he's in it is very good. I know a lot of people going in were afraid that they were only putting John Wick in this to make people go see it, but that wasn't the case at all. His involvement in this film was very good, and it was worth having him in it. This movie does take place between John Wick 3 and John Wick 4. So if you're into the John Wick universe, and I highly recommend this one, it's another great addition to the John Wick universe, and I give it a 4 out of 5. Next, on June 8th, I watched the newest Wes Anderson film, The Phoenician Scheme. This movie stars Benicio del Toro, Michael Cera, and a bunch of other great Wes Anderson actors that usually show up in his films. I actually like this movie a lot. In my opinion, I think it's Wes Anderson's best film since The Grand Budapest Hotel. Wes Anderson is just so good at framing scenes, and every scene he does in this film, and most of his movies, are so thought out, and they're just perfect. Every scene is just perfect. I also think this is Wes Anderson's funniest movie. I laughed quite a bit during this, and so did the theater that I was in when I watched it. Now, Wes Anderson is someone that you kind of have to have the taste to watch. He's very artsy, is the word I would use for it. He's more for like film nerds like me that love film and what goes into it. He's very much making movies for those kind of people. However, I think with this one, anybody could watch this. His last two films, Asteroid City and The French Dispatch, were examples of going a little too far where normal audiences may not understand it completely. But this one, he sort of gets back on track with, you know, reeling in normal audiences that may not understand all those deeper film nerd elements. Now, what this movie's about is about this guy, played by Benicio del Toro, who is trying to get people to invest in his infrastructure plan. He's calling it the Phoenician Scheme. And then what I liked a lot about this movie is it's kind of him going to each person, and then at the very end is the big ending where everybody's there and everybody's attending like this meeting. I'm a really big fan of when movies do small things and then it leads to one big thing at the end. There's also a great scene in this movie that I thought was hilarious, with Tom Hanks and Bryan Cranston playing basketball. They play sort of like serious characters in this film, and then all of a sudden they're just shooting baskets together.
Classic backhand layup.
Overall, I thought The Phoenician Scheme was a great film and a great comedy. Funniest movie of the year for me so far, and I give it a 4 out of 5. And speaking of Wes Anderson, after I saw The Phoenician Scheme, I wanted to watch some of his other movies that I hadn't seen yet. So on June 9th, I finally watched The French Dispatch. What this is like the head of this newspaper company dies, and they decide to end the newspaper, and they're going to put out one final issue where they're going to sort of put in their most famous stories throughout the time of the magazine or newspaper. I can't remember, newspaper or magazine, one of the two. So this movie is basically 3 stories in one. It started out really great. I really liked the first story, but then the next 2 stories were kind of either a little boring or they just weren't anything as good as the first story that was shown. It's got a great cast though. It's got Timothée Chalamet. Benicio del Toro was great in this. He was the best part of this movie in my opinion. Jeffrey Wright was also really great in this. In my opinion, those are the 2 standouts, was Jeffrey Wright and Benicio del Toro. And so overall, I give The French Dispatch a 3.5 out of 5. Next, on June 11th, I watched Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Now, this is the final film in the Mission Impossible franchise that has been going on since the 90s. I really love this franchise, so I'm very sad that it's come to an end. Now, the one thing I'll say about this movie is it's a very long movie. It's almost 3 hours, which isn't a problem for me. However, I wish there was a little bit more action in it. All these Mission Impossible movies before this one, the action is crazy. Not that the action in this one isn't crazy, I just feel like there wasn't enough in it. There was maybe like 1 or 2 sequences of action, and the rest of the movie was dialogue and other things like that. In my opinion, if you're going to do a final film, especially in an action franchise, then you should have insane action for that final film. And unfortunately, I just felt like it lacked a lot of the action that we normally see in these films. It was still a great movie. I still really liked it, really enjoyed it, but in my opinion, it just ranks lower on the franchise ranking. Maybe if this movie had taken place earlier in the franchise instead of as the very last film, then I would have liked it a little more. For reference, I gave Fallout a 5 out of 5, and then I gave Dead Reckoning a 4.5 out of 5. And then this one is just a little bit lower than I thought I was going to give it. Still a great movie though. Tom Cruise is great in this, still doing insane things for the love of cinema. And I have to respect that. I really do respect Tom Cruise and all he gives for his movies. Overall, I give Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning a 3.5 out of 5. Next, on June 17th, I watched David Byrne's American Utopia. Now, this is a concert film, so not your typical movie. Kind of hard to review this, but I thought I would include it anyways because it still counts as a film. I love Talking Heads and David Byrne's music, so I knew I was going to love this. The main reason I decided to watch this was because I bought tickets to see David Byrne later this year in November, so I wanted to kind of see what his concerts are about. I had seen Stop Making Sense before, which is the biggest music film of all time that came out in the 80s. So after watching that, I knew that David Byrne knows how to put on really entertaining shows. So I decided to give this a watch since he decided to do his newer concerts as a film too. And just like in Stop Making Sense, he's just so good at performing and choreographing everything and putting on just a really great show. Overall, I give David Byrne's American Utopia a 5 out of 5, and I can't wait to see him later this year in November. Next, on June 17th, I watched Love Lies Bleeding. Now, this is a movie where a gym manager and a bodybuilder that arrives into town and starts using her gym, they start falling in love with each other. But the gym manager has a really crazy family, and the bodybuilder starts to get involved in it, and it just becomes a huge mess. This movie has themes of drug addiction and alcohol addiction, and addiction in general, really. Once again, another great film that has some great messages behind the movie. Kristen Stewart is so good in this. In my opinion, Kristen Stewart is the most underrated actress of our time. She's been great in everything I've seen her in. Besides Twilight, of course. I've never seen Twilight, but we don't count that. I'm talking about modern Kristen Stewart. She's been great in everything that she's been in recently. Katie O'Brien also really shines in this film. She's a new actress, and she's showing up in some movies. And she's been great in pretty much everything I've seen her in, but she really shines in this one. The only real complaint I have with this one is it kind of ends a little weird. Now, I'm all for weird stuff in movies. I'm a full supporter of that. However, this movie, with how serious it was, with the themes of addiction and the criminal family involvement and things like that, I just felt like ending it the way that it ended was just a little weird for the tone of the movie. But overall, this is a great crime thriller film, great romance film as well. I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Next, on June 18th, I watched the new live-action film of How to Train Your Dragon. Now, this movie is pretty much a shot-by-shot remake of the animated version. So if you're a fan of the original animated version of How to Train Your Dragon, then you'll for sure like this one. I thought they did a really good job at adapting this into live action. As we've seen with a lot of like Disney live-action remakes, they just don't do it as well as they should. Oftentimes, the biggest problem, even with like adapting video games and books and stuff like that, they don't know how to stick to the material. A lot of times they'll change things or change the ending or change how somebody died or this person dies instead. You know, they just don't stick to the original story. This film, however, is directed by the same guy that directed the animated version, so basically he's just transforming his animated film into live action. So I felt like he did a really good job of that. Another example is like the most recent Last of Us. Last of Us Season 2 got a lot of criticism from fans because it did so many different things than what the video game did. But anyways, this movie doesn't do that. It sticks with it. It's basically just shot-by-shot remake, just in live action. I also thought the CGI was really good as well. None of the dragons looked goofy or weird at all. The original animated How to Train Your Dragon is a 5 out of 5 for me. However, this live action gets a 4 out of 5 from me. Next up, on June 23rd, I watched 28 Weeks Later. Now, real quick before I get into 28 Weeks Later, I do want to briefly talk about 28 Days Later. I love 28 Days Later. That's, in my opinion, one of the best zombie films ever made. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I watched this a couple years ago, and then I rewatched it before I watched 28 Weeks Later. So going into 28 Weeks Later, I already had my expectations a little low because I've heard from people that 28 Weeks Later is nowhere near as good as 28 Days Later, and unfortunately that was true. I felt like a lot of the characters, especially the kids in this movie, just weren't as good as the characters in the first one. For starters, the kids are basically the reason the zombies expand out of London. If you haven't seen these films, basically what it is a virus got loose in London, that they were experimenting on monkeys, and these animal activists came in to stop them from testing on animals. And while they were attempting to save the monkeys got loose, and the virus they had in them was called a rage virus. The rage virus makes them angry and, rageful, and they attack. And then once you spread that blood or saliva or anything like that onto another person or another animal, then that animal or person also becomes infected with the rage virus. Now in these films, it's only the UK that's infected with it. Everywhere else around the world is completely fine, but the UK is kind of closed off from the rest of the world because of this. But yeah, 28 Weeks Later just was not as good as the first one. I wish they would have kept the same characters from 28 Days Later and carried them over to 28 Weeks Later, but this one follows completely different characters. The opening of this movie, however, is extremely good. That opening is amazing. But I still thought it was entertaining and still a great film. I don't think it was a bad movie. I just don't think it was as good as 28 Days Later. And for those reasons, I give 28 Weeks Later a 3 out of 5. And next, on June 25th, I watched the new film in the 28 trilogy, 28 Years Later. Now, 28 Years Later, of course, by the title of the film, takes place 28 years after the virus broke out and started infecting everybody. It follows a boy and his family on this island that's kind of away from the mainland where the virus had broken out. So on this island, they're completely safe. They have everything that they need to live. They have food and water. However, every once in a while, they do go out and scavenge the mainland to try to find new supplies and things like that. So one day, a father decides to take his son out to go scavenge the mainland, and while they're out, he sees this weird-looking dude and a fog of smoke. Coming back to the island, he finds out that what that was is a doctor that people believe has gone insane, but the boy believes that he hasn't gone insane and that it's worth going to try to find him. And the reason the boy wants to find him is because his mother is sick and he wants to help his mother get better. So the main plot of the film is the boy sneaks out of the island with his mom to go back to the mainland so that he can find that doctor to hopefully save her life and cure her illness. This is a very good movie, very emotional film as well. It has a lot to do with humanity and processing grief, especially in a time like this where so many people have died. There's a scene in particular where if you've seen the promotional material for this movie, you've seen this statue of skeletons, bones and things like that, their skulls. Now going into the movie, you might think that this is some evil demonic situation going on, but once you watch the movie and you see what that really is, it's a really emotional thing. It did the complete opposite of what I thought was going to happen. Instead of making me scared, it made me cry. This movie is one of the best movies of the year so far for me. I really loved this movie. This movie does have a lot of mixed feelings about the ending. However, I don't think the ending was that crazy. I feel like the rest of the movie outweighs the ending anyways. So even if you weren't into how the movie ended, you can hopefully appreciate what the film was doing and the messages it was giving the audience. The boy that's in this movie, this was also his first movie that he's ever been in, so huge applause for him for his performance in this incredible first debut performance in a film. Overall, I give 28 Years Later a 4.5 out of 5, and I cannot wait for the next installment that's supposed to come out in January, which will be 28 weeks later than the release of this film. So I'm a really big fan of how that mapped out perfect for them. And last, on June 27th, I finally watched a Criterion film that I've had for a while, After Hours. Now, as I've said previously in some of my past videos, Barnes & Noble is currently doing their month-long Criterion 50% off sale. So I started to watch some of the ones that I have in my collection that I just haven't gotten to yet. And one of the ones is Martin Scorsese's After Hours. This is such a fun, fantastic film. I really loved this movie. It's a really chaotic story about a guy who meets this girl at a cafe one night, and he gets her number and he goes back to his place and she goes back to hers. She calls him and offers him to come over for a little bit so they can hang out. So he goes over to her place, and the rest of the night is just one bad thing after another bad thing. And just when you think it can't get any worse, it gets worse. It's a really great anxiety-inducing film. It's just chaos the whole way through. This poor guy goes through so much in one night. All he wanted to do was spend time with a girl he found at a cafe, but instead he gets caught up in so much stuff. It's just so many things that happen to him in one night. For example, he starts off in this girl's apartment, and by later in the night he's being chased around the city by a mob, and he has wanted posters all over the city. Now, to see why he's being hunted by a mob that has wanted posters all over the city, you'll have to watch to find out. This is a really great, fun Martin Scorsese film. Highly recommend this. If you're looking to pick up films in the Criterion collection this month, highly recommend After Hours. You won't regret it. After watching it, I've already wanted to watch it again. It's just a really fun film. Highly recommend it, and I give it a 4.5 out of 5. And those are all the movies that I watched for the month of June. I hope you enjoyed this and you want to see more. If you are into my ratings and you want to see more of them, check me out on Letterboxd. My username is Blake7180. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you've seen any of these films, and let me know what you thought about them, especially some of the newer releases like Ballerina and 28 Years Later. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.